The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseWare continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseWare at ocw.mit.edu.
A remarkable man with a long history. He was one of the key people in the reform of British science from, sort of a intense but nevertheless fairly gentlemanly pursuit to moving it into institutions in England. And Huxley was identified with the Royal School of Mines. That's where he was appointed after he came back from his rattlesnake voyage. And then he was instrumental in the establishment of the Imperial College of Science and Technology. So he became one of the key people in moving it from down in the area of Piccadilly up to Knightsbridge and building it up into one of the great institutions. He was one of the inaugural speakers, the inaugural speaker at the establishment of Johns Hopkins University. Came over to America, traveled in America, and said, he was incredibly articulate. He just had a way with language that he could write fairly detailed, complicated scientific papers, but he could turn around and write an essay that could be published in a journal and be read by thousands and thousands of people. So he had this versatility with language, and he was a pretty aggressive promoter of science. He became known as Darwin's bulldog because he had this kind of he liked debate, vigorous debate, and when evolution was debated in polite circles, in university locations, by people who were trying to present it in an unfavorable light, Huxley was quite happy to step up to the stage and debate evolution itself, even though evolution at the time was often unpopular. So Huxley really became an advocate for approaching knowledge with a objective, clear sense of not bringing bias and so forth into the picture, trying to just see what the facts. He's one of his quotes was, sit down before fact as a little child and just learn from the facts and see what you can make of them and try to eliminate biases. So he really was a key figure in the 19th century, an advocate for just open approach to knowledge and to pursuing knowledge for knowledge's sake, just for the love of learning. And definitely he was more than happy to face off with the consequences of whatever he learned. He was as Devin said, he was a comparative anatomist, morphologist. He studied in the framework of evolution, paleontology. He also was someone who did a lot in science education. He wrote the classic papers of science education in the 19th century. So. And the reform of education, the education that Butler talks about in Erewhon, the colleges of unreason, where you learn the hypothetical language and so forth. Butler was he was satirizing the curriculum of English University of those days that he had encountered at Cambridge, where the emphasis was on learning Latin and getting grounding in theology and classical thought, but without any kind of any kind of access to practical knowledge. So Huxley was the answer to that in many ways. He brought in the arguments that science education was not only important in the intellectual sense, but it was an important part of becoming a mature society, to become knowledgeable about science. Contemporary society could learn a lot from Huxley, because we don't necessarily embrace those principles even now, and that is we sometimes limit the time and significance we attribute to scientific knowledge and spend our time on other matters that are less urgent. Which is not to say that Huxley was all about urgency, but he was a big, robust personality, and he definitely thought a lot about his contemporary society. So science was important. He loved science. He loved the pursuit of science, but he also saw the larger society and tried to place his knowledge into the context of larger society. And that's really the source of our essay today, which is his introduction to evolution and ethics, called Prolegomena. And this work touches on many of the themes that we've been talking about, many of the books he references, lots of the works that we've come across. And there are even allusions to things that Butler and others have said. But certainly Malthus is a presence in this piece of work. Okay, so here you have, so in Evolution and Ethics, Huxley's, he develops this whole dialogue, this whole discourse on the two states. The fact that there's a state of nature and then there's a state of art. And I mean, it's something we can debate, because, you know, it's not necessarily a pat distinction, and we'll get into that a little bit. As I said, he did become known as Darwin's bulldog because he became a very vigorous advocate for evolution. And this was not always popular. So he sometimes found himself on the public stage. And there's sort of a celebrated encounter between him and Bishop Wilberforce. Many people have written various things, and, you know, it's been kind of expanded into sort of a cultural myth, because it was the clash between the man of science, the rationalist, and the theologian, who was based in, you know, the traditions of the religious texts. And, you know, they sort of clashed on stage in front of a bunch of undergraduates at Oxford who were, you know, whooping and howling and, you know, all sort of watching this kind of face-off between these two distinguished sort of authorities. And anyways, he got quite a bit of notoriety from that. He also published, you recall, I mentioned one of his books earlier, Man's Place in Nature, which was a work that was published right around the time of The Origin of Species, and a little bit before. And in that work, he argued that humans were simply to be seen within the framework of primates. He did not make an explicit argument that they had derived from a common ancestor. That wasn't his purpose. His purpose in his book, Man's Place in Nature, was simply to frame the human body, its structure, its status as an organism within the context of the natural world, and to say humans are natural entities, or they have to be thought of as primates. And this was a very bold thing to do at this time, and he was cautioned by a number of people, including Charles Lyell, that this was pushing the envelope a little far. But he loved sort of doing that, so that was part of his personality. So yes, he on the religious thing, he just said, You know, he didn't have the authority to disprove religion, and he did not have the evidence to accept it. So he called himself an agnostic. It's just, for him, the word agnostic just meant it's not within the realm of his ability to either prove or disprove. And so this has become quite a controversial term. Okay, so he, and then the quote, and then his quote was, "Sit down before fact as a little child, be prepared to give up every preconceived notion, follow humbly wherever or whatever abysses nature leads, or you will learn nothing." And you recall Norbert Wiener, he said the same thing in his essay, which was published years and years later, of course, that the searcher for knowledge must be prepared to entertain heretical notions in the pursuit of knowledge. All right, so evolution and ethics. This was one of Huxley's final works, and it was a set of essays that he produced in 1893 and 1894, which were part of a lecture series, a Romanus lecture series. So he was invited to give a lecture by one of his friends, George Romanus, and he delivered the essay Evolution and Ethics first, and then he delivered an introduction to it, because the essay itself was really just the length of a public talk, and he felt he really had to add more context to it. So that's the part that I asked you to read. It's called a Prolegomena. It's just an introduction to evolution and ethics. So what's Huxley concerned about in this essay? And what are some of the topics? How does he set this up? Yeah, Chris.
He puts forth a state of nature and a state of art. State of nature being the state of a land or a place before the intervention of human intervention, and the state of art being the environment after humans have been introduced.
He acknowledges that the world of Darwin and the world of nature itself is, he notes that, this is a prevailing state. This is a sort of cosmic state, if you will. The Earth has emerged at a certain point in its history of time into the natural landscapes that we're familiar with when we go out into the wilderness or into undeveloped areas. And in Huxley's day, of course, there was much more of this. I mean, sometimes a modern urban liver, inhabitant, has a very hard time finding these locations. We go to parks and places like that and see if we can find nature, because humanness. But, this whole concept of a state of nature, that this is the normal way things are, and that, it's basically part of the extension of the cosmos, basically. He says, measured by a liberal scale of timekeeping of the universe, this present state of nature, however it may seem to have gone and to go on forever, is but a fleeting phase of her infinite variety. Turn back a square foot of the thin turf in the solid foundation of the land, exposed in cliffs of chalk, 500 feet high on the adjacent shore, yields full assurance of a time when the sea covered the site of the everlasting hills. This is a point, and there's a lot of irony. I mean, Huxley's very good with making these little twists, but the fact that we think of these as the South Downs in England as everlasting hills and so forth, well, as a matter of fact, they've been under the ocean more than once. So, this notion. So, what emerges from this concept of nature? He says there's one principle in all this that we can say runs through the whole thing? What is it? Gentlemen.
Quote, all entities in the universe, Huxley argues, oh, actually that's my quote, never mind. All entities in the universe, not those of just of biological origin, are undergoing evolution. And the big, so that's the big theme, is that it's not just living things, but it's the rocks and the any kind of organized system, you know. So.
Yeah, and the one permanent thing is not some form, but the permanent thing is change. There's nothing that's going to stay the same. Everything is changing constantly. Life forms are changing. Land forms are changing. The world is part of an incredible array of cosmic substance that is constantly undergoing shifts and change. And humans sort of sit within one little speck of time within this vast system of change. And what's in their interests? What do they do about change? Why? What's the point of trying to create a state of art?
Stop change from ever
Yeah,
happening.
it's basically to stop the change from happening, or at least to control it. I mean, that's what civilization is trying to do at some level, is to counter this constant change of the natural forces so that we can create a level of stability within which we can live. And that's the concept of the colony.
Yeah, we ironically call it forward progress, right?
Yeah,
I was about to say.
yeah. Claire?
Oh, no, well, just like, I wouldn't have automatically thought that we as a species were trying to stop change. Like, it seems like we make all this technology and do all the things that we do in order to improve, and in improving, we're changing.
Yeah.
But then there is like the need for stability too, which makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good. Charles?
I'm all of a sudden reminded of Wordsworth's poem that we read at the very
Yeah.
start.
Yeah.
With Tintern Abbey.
Yes.
And like just the struggle, not the struggle, but like kind of just the dynamics between man and nature. How like neglect, like just active forces on one side will try to take over the other.
Yeah.
And so like that kind of conflict, I guess, is
Yeah.
discussed here as well.
Well, that's an excellent point, because Wordsworth is, what is his position with regard to nature and change? I mean, doesn't he want to? He wants to live within it. He wants to, somehow accept it, and not to completely. I mean, if you want to see an expression of the desire to stop change, just go look at, John Hancock Building or something. There's a stable environment inside the tower, and in that tower we control. And we set up a very stable system in which we can walk around without coats and things of that sort, and go about our business. But we can't have rainstorms coming into the. I mean, we are constantly trying to create a sort of a framework around ourselves, and to keep the forces of the sort of uncontrolled forces of nature on the outside, and control our inside environment. At least this is Huxley's position. So he, as he says in the bottom here, he's talking about evolution now. He's really just saying that evolution is really talking about this idea of change, that things constantly change, that over millennia one form will descend into other forms, and nothing stays the same. So he says the word evolution, now generally applied to the cosmic process, has had a singular history and is used in various senses. Taken in its popular signification, it means progressive development, that is, gradual change from a condition of relative uniformity to one of relative complexity. But its connotation has been widened to include the phenomena of retrogressive metamorphosis, that is, a progress from a condition of relative complexity to one of relative uniformity. So evolution can go in all directions. is not necessarily consistent with our concept of progress, where things always get better and more stable. Okay, so he has this state of nature, to which he matches this what he calls the state of art. And I have to say, this was not simply accepted. A lot of people rejected this argument of Huxley's, and even scientific colleagues of his were upset that he tried to argue that the state of art was different from the state of nature, because what would be the problem? What are the problem of saying that humans are somehow opposed to nature by creating the state of art, and that the state of art and the state of nature are opposed? What are some of the problems in that argument? Well, maybe the first. Somebody's recording next door. Is that it? We'll have a little background here. Okay, so what is the state of art? Let's just see what he's. What are some examples? It's okay. It's a little background. Isn't gonna hurt anything. What is the state of art? Yeah, David.
Isn't the state of art like things that man uses / creates for man's benefit?
Yeah, it's the sort of built environment that we're so familiar with. We build an environment for ourselves to live in. I mean, you could say there are certain organisms that do, similar things. There are termites that build towers that they live in. There are beavers that build beaver dams and huts and everything they love. So, birds build nests. So there are a lot of organisms that create built environments. So what's different about humans?
You can't really take creativity away from like the beaver or the ant, because it's amazing that they figure out and that they build these things that are so functional and what they need them to do. But there is like the art form that you're talking about behind human building. Like, we don't just take wood and make something to cover ourselves with when it rains. We paint the walls and we like try to make it look pretty. And there are places like, have you ever seen the Pompidou Center in France? They have all of the plumbing and everything on the outside. It's just like a show of everything that humans, and there's like the escalator on the outside. And, we don't need escalators. We could just be on one floor, but we choose to express ourselves like that further bit than other species.
So there's ingenuity that, this comes back to our concepts of design. There is design in a beaver dam, is there not? There is design in a beaver hut. There is design in a...
functional, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas with humans, a lot of things are purely aesthetic.
Okay, so I think that's what you were getting at, right? That we not only create function, but we create beauty. We create and it comes back to this word creativity. What is the basis? What is driving this building in Darwin's? Remember chapter 7, instinct. What's driving this building? It's fundamentally instinctual based, is it not? Do you think it's any different for humans? Do we build out of instinct?
Well, I thought you were talking about humans, and I was kind of.
Well, no, I was saying, when we're talking about animals, except humans, we see a lot of building in those in the worlds of organisms. Build all kinds of structures. Yeah.
Well, I think it's kind of weird. I think we kind of originally build stuff to get away from nature, like to get out of, so we can control our climate and we don't have to be in the rain all the time. But then once we add art back to it, it's almost like we're trying to return to nature by making a pretty picture like that. So something we would see in nature. And so it's almost like we're getting out of it just to get back into it by adding this art form to it.
But to get back in more comfortably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We definitely want to create a situation for ourselves that we can live more comfortably in. Who wants to get rained on? You know, I mean, maybe some people do, but most people want to be able to do other things and just sit there in the rain. So, you know, humans share a desire with other organisms that create these environments. What's the point of a beehive? I mean, the whole point is to create some kind of a stable environment so that, you know, they can reproduce, they can live and thrive, and so on and so forth. So, in many ways, don't we share the same impulse, except that we have, you know, we have intellectual capabilities that can take these principles and rationalize them and understand, I mean, and expand them into more and more complex and powerful ways of achieving these same ends. I mean, isn't that sort of what MIT is doing? A lot of MIT is doing is trying to create better environments and better structures, better materials, better, I mean, what's the point of the research that's going on in all our laboratories here if it isn't to somehow create a better environment for ourselves? That's where the end products of these understandings and these technological applications go into our environment someplace, doing something with our environment, our conditions of existence. So, so the question I have is the state of art itself that Huxley says is different and opposed to nature? I mean, is there a problem in that? You know, saying, well, you know, humans produce this state of art and it's opposed to nature, and you know, they're in some kind of conflict with each other. I don't have an answer. You know, if you think I'm expecting, you know, the right answer, I don't have one. But the question is how different are we from the rest of nature in the way in which we try to build environments? Devin, you had your hand up.
Whether we're talking about Darwin, about Huxley, or pretty much any theme in this course, one of the things that always comes up is that famous term, the struggle for existence. And in the quote from last night's reading, it says, "What is often called the struggle of existence in society, in parentheses, I plead guilty to having used this term too loosely myself, is a contest not for a means of existence, but for a means of enjoyment." Okay. And what I take from that is, you know, when you've got the bees and the beavers, they're incredibly industrious, but their designs are based on necessity. Whereas if you look at something like the Parthenon, it's beautiful, exceptionally wasteful, but just a token of our aesthetic and our roles as a culture. And you know, and this sentence doesn't just apply to things like architecture and art, which we take as the aesthetic form of enjoyment, but also to class struggle. It also describes why, you know, people continue to work harder, so in theory they can gain more wealth. The wealth does not secure them any kind of subsistence living, but allows them to partake in more enjoyment, whether that be, you know, needlessly expensive wines, prostitutes, or cars. You know, it doesn't matter. So.
Okay, I think I got that. Yeah, it is true that there's a residual element in human building that goes over from utility into self-expression. I mean, all the way back to those caves where some of the first brilliant paintings of horses and various, you know, the cave paintings of southern France and various other places in the world that show, I mean, the cave itself was an environment of some sort where humans could get out of the elements and create a better surrounding for themselves. But in those same locations is this kind of excess expression, this residuum, this going beyond just the utilitarian, and that gets into the Parthenon. Why the Parthenon? Why not just one of the most beautiful structures ever possibly created. What's the point of the pyramids? The Great Pyramids, yes, they're mausoleums, they're places of burial and so on, but why? What's this excess that goes into the creation of this towering structure? That's human. That's very, very human. And we don't know of cases like that in other organisms that I know of. There may be some crow or something that does something for itself and didn't need to, that's aesthetically motivated, but not to my knowledge. But many people, of course, did see nature in Darwin's time, and the beauties of nature in the flowers, the flora, and the expressions of beauty in things like the bird of paradise as this same impulse to create something artistic that's beautiful for nothing other than beauty. And what does Darwin's theory do to that? There's no capacity within Darwin's evolutionary system in the origin, or I'm not sure of capacity, but it's not a phenomenon that is recognized by Darwin. The beauty of all these things always comes back to some kind of function. The brilliance of the flower is to attract the bee, whether it's, or the brilliance of the bird of paradise is to attract the mate, but there's always some kind of function that it comes back to. Okay, so yeah, there is in these human environments something quite different, but also something quite consistent with natural building. All right, so Huxley, he talks about the fact that the cosmic process of nature will constantly wear down what humans build. And, all he has to do is just cite the ruins of the world. I mean, Troy had been discovered, many structures, Tintern Abbey, Wordsworth's beautiful site of his glorious poem, is itself an example of, the destruction of nature, of natural forces. The fact that, if you leave the Empire State Building, eventually, if nobody does anything to that building, it'll fall over. It won't exist forever. These bridges that we build, they're marvelous structures, and they last for some of them a couple of hundred years, or maybe less. Some of them maybe more, but eventually they'll all fall down because under the force of nature, wear takes place. What is wear? I mean, wear is that's what gets mechanical engineers really excited. Wear, W-E-A-R, how does it take place? What are the structures? What are the ways in which things actually fracture? And, they study this in a million different ways to try to understand it better. And why? To build something that'll last longer under natural forces and natural stresses. We study this stuff constantly. That's what we develop calculus and all the other methods that we use to kind of describe natural phenomena. So in some ways, you're fighting wear, you're fighting aging, you're fighting the process of nature. So this is kind of the crux of this key first part of this essay. The fact that our cities, as the bottom illustration here shows, eventually will all come falling down. And what's the ultimate implication of this in Huxley's essay? What ultimately will happen to human civilization? Well, die out is probably not quite the right term, but eventually, as the cosmic process takes place, millions or billions of years from now, Earth will go the way of the rest of the cosmos. We're not here forever. I mean, it's a theoretical end because it's not going to happen, we assume, within, the immediate future. But his point is eventually this built environment and all the things that humans have brought that they think of as the norm of time, in some sense, will be gone. It'll be just, prairies or grasslands or whatever happens, unless we do something really bad to the environment. It becomes something much worse. But eventually the impact of humans, far enough in time, will be gone.
He even says that even the most, just sticking with this metaphor, even the most industrious gardeners will eventually lose their apples and gooseberries, and
yeah,
after
exactly.
that.
Yeah, we can't ultimately resist the cosmos and its forces. So it's a kind of there's a kind of biblical quality, if you will, to this essay, because it sort of brings people back to the fact that the dust to dust saying has a kind of scientific basis that yes, eventually things will be back to what they were long before, or other forms, but this sense of humans as here forever, enduring forever, and so on is, it's not accurate. Okay. All right. Then he gets into he talks about the colony. Humans develop colonies. We have a kind of a romance with colonies. We think of colonies as these incredible new environments, but in fact, colonies are pretty violent places of the intersections of different cultures, and one culture commonly dominates another.
So Huxley said that man within, the morals taught by society, live alongside innate personality. So you create a colony which comes from culture, and culture has the axiom that you don't kill each other, that you kind of allow your fellow man to exist, and that the immediate consequence of this is Malthusian population, because if you're not killing your fellow man, you just have unlimited expansion. So in this particular instance, while the technology points are true, this Malthusian expansion is about morals, and it's about the consequence of not allowing that. And then the last point I'll make is he mentions too that famous adage of "do unto others as you would have them do unto you" doesn't really work, and it's unrealistic if you want to keep a civil society, because if you commit a crime, you don't want to be hanged, you don't want to be put to death. That just doesn't work. So if you want to maintain civil society, a lot of the adages that we're taught in our cultural framework aren't going to hold up in the long run.
So the golden rule has limits. Okay. Well, that's what the middle paragraph here is. On the other hand, within the colony, the enforcement of peace, which deprives every man of the power to take away the means of existence from another simply because he is the stronger, would have put an end to the struggle for existence between the colonists, and the competition for the commodities of existence, which would alone remain, is no check upon population. So this is where the ethical. So why is ethics so important an issue in these colonies? Why does ethics? What do humans have that requires them to develop codes of ethical behavior?
So there would be a lot of chaos.
Okay, and what would that chaos come from?
Just like a fundamental lack of rules or structure.
Okay, and what does that allow?
It was kind of like what we were talking about with Hyde. If there were no morals, no structure, a lot of us would or could, I don't know, very well turn into little Hydes running around town and just like stomping on each other. So
so there's something within the human psyche that is aggressive. I mean, that's what he's talking about, is it not? And that's where Devin's point about the morals come in. Is humans have tendencies to, instinctual drives and so forth to do what they want to do. And among those things, under unregulated circumstances, might makes right. If you want to take, if you are struggling for resources, and the person who gets the resources wins, isn't that the way it works in nature? I mean, the natural environment of Darwin's world is a world in which, survival of the fittest by any means possible. Doesn't mean that everything's fighting constantly, but, if it comes to that, that's what happens. So, in human society, what would that do to human society? Well, I think you said it in the reference to Hyde. Hyde is a kind of a exaggeration, but it captures something.
Oh, we don't know.
What's that?
I don't know if it's an exaggeration
Well.
because it probably is,
Well.
but you never know. If you removed all restraints on everybody, what could happen?
Yeah.
You don't have much faith in people, do you?
I'm just saying.
Well, they're made up of complex. They're complex. Yeah. Okay. So this is a problem. This is a problem that Huxley hits upon here. Is the garden population expansion, and when populations expand too far, the normal tendency to live in harmony, if you will, begins to collapse. At least this is his theory. And that, under circumstances where societies are really highly overpopulated beyond their capacity to support, Huxley's argument is that the tendency will be to, for the moral structure to collapse. Now that's debatable. It's highly debatable, but because we've had Great Depressions, we've had things, periods, where societies were under incredible stress, and they didn't break down into just kind of physical violent behavior. However, we do know that crime rates go up, don't they, when resources become scarce? Lots of things do happen. And his argument here is that, at least part of it is that these states that we create for ourselves, these built environments, as they become overpopulated, they require, humans require, they have to regulate themselves. And that's part of what their laws and all their civic laws and things like that. I mean, we have an incredible law code, don't we?
Because immediately when you remove laws, like you said, crime rates just shoot right up. Like if you look at somewhere after a hurricane or some kind of natural disaster where the people who enforce the rules
that's a good example. Yeah.
when they're occupied with other things, immediately robbery is no big deal, and you can just go into somebody else's house and
No, it's absolutely true. So this is this is part of this society. We have an incredible law code, volumes. Where's that coming from? We didn't just do that just because somebody thought, oh, it'd be nice to do this. It's all been developed out of cases and cases and cases, and the need to develop, promulgate a code of behavior. And it's rather extensive. It's huge. So we do self-regulate. Okay, so Huxley brings up the question of humans selecting other humans. How does this fit into this picture that he's drawing? The eugenics movement. A number of people who were, I think it's Francis Galton, who were very eager and interested in developing sort of approaches to selecting, or not in a sense of exterminating anything, but sort of in the Butlerian sense of well, not in the Butlerian sense, because there they took people to court if they had bad genetic makeup or expression of they were weak in something in one way or another. But this idea in the garden of why does this connect to this garden imagery of humans selecting other humans? To get this perfect little society, to get this perfect big society, what would the last step be? What could the last step conceivably be? To apply these same principles to the inhabitants, which would be eugenics and the selection for strengthening the stock, if you will. And there were plenty of plans, plenty of groups in Huxley's day interested in exactly these kinds of ideas. There was this whole group, the Eugenics Society of London, in the 1890s. It was quite active. And there were eugenics movements in the U.S., and these were all movements that were intended to look across the population, find ways of improving the common stock of humans. So you would get a kind of a Erewhonian, a society of Erewhonians, beautiful people who all were healthy and did the right thing and fit into the right spaces at the right time. And we've had endless science fiction works that have explored these sorts of things. But it's an idea that really came out of the Darwinian age. So what does Huxley say about this? So he says here in section 15, he says, to return once more to the parallel of horticulture, in the modern world, the gardening of men by themselves is practically restricted to the performance not of selection, but of that other function of the gardener, the creation of conditions more favorable than those of the state of nature. He says here, I have further shown cause for the belief, this is in section 12, that direct selection after a fashion of the horticulturist and the breeder neither has played nor can play any part in the evolution of society. Apart from other reasons, because I do not see how such selection could be practiced without a serious weakening, it may be the destruction of the bonds which hold society together. It strikes me that men who are accustomed to contemplate the active or passive extirpation of the weak, the unfortunate, and the superfluous, who justify that conduct on the ground that it has the sanction of the cosmic process, i.e. is following evolutionary principles, and is the only way of ensuring the progress of the race, who, if they are consistent, must rank medicine among the black arts and count the physician a mischievous preserver of the unfit. He's thinking of Erewhon here. On whose matrimonial undertakings the principles of the stud have the chief influence, whose whole lives, therefore, are an education in the noble art of suppressing natural affection and sympathy, are not likely to have any large stock of those commodities left. But without them there is no conscience nor any restraint on the conduct of men, except the calculation of self-interest, the balancing of certain present gratifications against doubtful future pains, and experience tells us how much that is worth. Every day we... Okay, so what's he getting at here?
The fact that we're far from getting to a place where we are going to perfect the inhabitants of our garden, because I don't think anyone can foresee any of us at a point in the near future calling a doctor a mischievous preserver of the unfit.
Doctors were unpopular.
Yeah, but today though, I don't think that's anything that's going to happen anytime soon. So.
Well, I mean, it goes back to the question that many people thinking about Darwin and the principles of Darwin and the whole concept of domestication and so forth, and applying those principles to humans, think that somehow the human society can somehow exercise some collective authority over the results of human reproduction, really. I mean, it sort of comes down to those terms, because if you're thinking in an evolutionary sense, this is what you might come upon as a way of managing human society. And Huxley's point here is that it would probably create the opposite effect of what you're trying to achieve, because by exercising these kinds of powers over other people, you would destroy the bonds of society and you destroy the ethical basis of society. That's where the ethics comes back in here. Evolution and ethics. Evolution is not ethical. Evolution does not deliver ethical society. Ethics is something that belongs to the built environment. In some sense, it is an extension of the state of art. The state of ethics is part of that state. The ethical codes. And they forbid the application of natural principles to all these elements of human life. So that's when we come back down to the core question of evolution and ethics. It's that, can ethics be seen as a way of behaving according to nature? And Huxley's argument is emphatically it cannot.